sort of it knows what's going on. So, all right. Hey, as we sort of get into the message and topic for this week, I wanted to have you discuss something with someone around you. There's already been a lot of talking up here. So turn to someone next to you and try to distinguish the difference between a house and a home. Okay, how would you make that distinction? Go ahead. Just take a minute or two. All right. You got it all figured out? Yep. So, which one's easier to define? A house. Yeah, a house is way more concrete. It's a structure usually used to distinguish between an apartment or a condo, a house. A home's a little bit trickier, isn't it? It's a lot broader of a concept. It could be all of those places. It could be any number of places. Your car could be your home. There's lots of different places that could be your home. Let me give you an example of this. Last Sunday, an example of how broad this term can be. Last Sunday, I didn't know it, but as I was up here preaching, I looked over here, and one of my best friends in the whole world and his wife were sitting over there. I'm sure I did sort of like a double take. I want to go back and watch the video and see when I actually saw them. But afterwards, they live in Kentucky, that's why it was such a surprise. But afterwards, I was talking to him, and he asked the question, hey, you've been here 2 years now, so does Texas feel like home? You know, he wasn't asking, hey, does your house sort of meet your needs? Is your house comfortable? He wasn't asking that. He was asking, do you feel like you have a little bit of ownership of this place? Do you feel familiar? Do you feel like you know people and people know you? Do your kids feel connected? Have you found places to contribute and invest? I mean, home is a very broad topic. And home, it kind of strikes a deep chord with all of us, doesn't it? I mean, for most of us, home's a little bit of a mixed bag. Immediately when you say the word home, there's probably some nostalgic positive memories that come, but then there's probably also some painful things that immediately come flooding in as well. It's a mixed bag. It's rarely a neutral concept because home is so personal. It's so influential. None of us could escape it. We all grew up in some home, like it or not. And currently we're all in some sort of home with its strengths and its weaknesses. And it's interesting when you look at the Bible through this lens of home. Because the Bible starts and ends by painting these beautiful pictures of home. And they're not just pictures. The Bible is telling us history. That human history, it starts and ends with this incredible home in every aspect of the word. And everything you find between the two covers could be described as this quest to find home in the midst of this broken and messed up world. Let me give you the history of the Bible in like 3 minutes as it relates to home. Okay, so Adam and Eve are placed in this perfect, lush garden that cares for all of their needs. But the absolute best part of this first home was the people that were there, the person that was there. It was God himself. That's what made this home so incredible. They had an intimacy with God unlike anything we've ever known. They would walk with him in the cool of the day. Intimacy with God. But their sin quickly broke that. When they rebelled against him, God could no longer have that sort of intimacy with fallen creatures. And so God, he had to banish them from the garden. And so Adam and Eve are left to wander, to try to eke out some sort of existence. Fast forward a little bit. God calls Abraham to leave his home and to go to a new land. And Abraham obeys. He takes his family, all his livestock, everyone in his household, and he takes off. And for the rest of Abraham's life, he is a wanderer. He lives in tents. He is looking for this promised land. He never fully makes it. Years later, when God miraculously rescues his people out of Egypt, They spend decades wandering around in search of this promised land. They're never fully settled. They're always forward-looking. They're always dreaming of this promised land. Finally, they get to the promised land, and as readers, we're like, all right, finally, they're there. Things are going to be good now. The good life's coming, but that's not what happens. No, God's people, they if you read Joshua and Judges, they don't do exactly what God asked them to do. They allow certain other nations to live in the land with them. And when they do that, the result is that pagan influence, it leads God's people away from their devotion to Him. There's conflicts, there's wars, there's famine, there's injustice. You're like, this is not the promised land. Even when you get to the golden era of Israel's history, you think of King David and King Solomon, it just doesn't last very long. Right after that, there's this downward spiral of king after king who leads God's people away from their devotion to God. And so God sends the prophets, one after another, to say, change, repent, change the way you're living, or I'm going to judge you and I'm going to expel you from the land. And prophet after prophet comes and the people don't listen. And so God allows these other nations to come in and to conquer Israel and take God's people far away. And once again, they're wanderers. They're homeless. But it's in that homeless state that God sends other prophets. This is now getting towards the end of the Old Testament. You read prophets like Ezekiel. You read prophets like Zechariah. And they prophesy to a time that, okay, God is going to bring you back one day. And yet when he starts dreaming of what this promised land is going to be like when God brings you back finally, you realize he's not really talking about a physical place anymore. He's talking about this future heaven, this future city where God is once again going to dwell with mankind. Even in the New Testament, the followers of Jesus knew that no earthly city was really their true home. Over and over again, they call themselves aliens and strangers. They're living here, but they're really citizens of another country. And then the story of the Bible ends with one of Jesus' followers sort of getting this picture of what their future home is going to look like. It's this city that comes down from heaven, but the distinguishing feature of this city is that once again, God is going to dwell with his people. We will be his people, and he will be our God. And that's how the story ends. But you can see throughout the whole story, God's people have been wanderers. They've been aliens. They've been strangers, never fully settled, always looking ahead to some future home that's off in the distance. And what I was struck with this week in reading a lot of this was the deep sense of longing that exists in God's people. As you read Scripture, there's this deep desire for a true home where God's presence is. They just sort of ached for it. I want to show you a number of passages where this sort of comes out. And it's not like we're going to go in depth on these. As you hear these passages, listen to the emotion behind them. Psalm 84, how lovely is your dwelling place, Lord Almighty. My soul yearns, even faints, for the courts of the Lord. My heart and flesh cry out for the living God. Now, this is how the psalmist felt when he first wrote this down. But the Psalms became the hymn book for the people of God. These are the prayers and the songs that they would repeat over and over again. So this became the heart's cry of all of God's people. Now, there's another one. Psalm 42. As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, my God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When can I go and meet with God? Psalm 27. One thing I ask of the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and seek him in his temple. This same longing is in the New Testament. Let me show you a couple places. This is Paul in 2 Corinthians. For we know that if this earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal house in heaven, not built by human hands. Meanwhile, we groan, longing to be clothed instead with our heavenly dwelling. This is a famous passage in Philippians. For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I go on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet what shall I choose? I do not know. I am torn between the two. I desire to depart to be with Christ, which is better by far. You hear his longing. And then probably the clearest passage on the longing of God's people is in the book of Hebrews, where the author of Hebrews is really doing what we just did. He's sort of summing up the history of God's people. But look what he says in Hebrews 11. He says, all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they'd been thinking about the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. This morning, I want us to talk about longing. I want us to talk about desire. We are the people of God in this generation, and yet, I don't know about you, but when I read passages like that, I feel like my longing muscles have atrophied. That somehow I've sort of settled here. That I've just decided to make this place home, and this sense of longing for this other country, this true home, it's just not nearly as strong as what I see recorded by God's people in the past. And so I found myself asking the question, how can we increase our longing? But that led me to another question, because that's a how question. And why questions always come before how questions. So the real question is, why should we long for heaven? Before we can ask, how can we increase our longing, why should we long for our true home? So let's just talk about these questions a little bit. But to do so, let's leave the spiritual realm completely for a second. We'll come back to it. Think just of your current home, all right? Wherever you live, think of that home. Now, all of us have times when we just want to go home, right? When we could say, yeah, I long for home. So don't say it out loud, but think, when is it that I really just want to go home? My guess is there's a few sort of obvious times where that's the case. At least it is for me. My guess is one of those times, I'll use these 3 stools that are here. I'm guessing one of those times is when we want rest, right? My guess is if you leave for work at 7:30 in the morning, by 9 o'clock a.m., you're not like, man, I just want to go home. But by 5:30 that evening, my guess is, yeah, I'm tired at that point. I just want to go home. Students, maybe you're in school all day, and then afterwards you've got sports practice or a game or something, and by the end you're just physically exhausted. You want to go home and put your feet up and just relax. If you travel for work, maybe if you've been away for a while, even on vacation, just being away from home long enough, eventually, I just want to go home. That last leg of the trip, you can almost ache to be home. Seems like whenever we're gone for a while, when we first get home, our kids just run around the house, just so happy to be back home. Depending where you are on that introvert-extrovert spectrum, after engaging people for a long time, you're just ready to be just away. Engaging sometimes takes a lot of energy. So we long for home when we want rest. We also, I think, long for home. I don't know if this is going to be completely blocked. When we just want to feel like we belong somewhere. I feel like outside the home, lots of the relationships we have a decent amount of performance tied into them, right? So students in school, you have to do well to sort of be on your teacher's good side. Or you feel like, man, I gotta get good grades so I can keep up with the rest of my friends. Because I don't want to be the one who's sort of falling behind while the rest of the group sort of moves. Or, at work, we all have different goals at work. And it's pretty obvious who's keeping up and who's not. And so we sort of feel this pressure. We feel this pressure as parents, too. Like, am I doing everything I need to be doing for my kids? Am I providing the right sort of experiences for them? Are they growing and learning relationally and spiritually and academically? There's a lot of pressure. And I think sometimes when we feel that pressure, we just want to escape and go somewhere where we feel like where we belong, just as we are, where we can just be. If you've ever tried to break into a new circle, maybe you've moved to a new city, maybe you've gone to a new church, maybe a new workplace, you're the outsider, you're the new person coming in, and it seems like everyone else already knows each other. They've got this whole inside language that they use. There's inside jokes that they have, and you just feel like you're on the outside, and you muster up all the courage you can to show up. But it's exhausting, and you want to go home, where you belong. So we long for home when we want to rest, when we want to feel like we belong. I think a lot of times we want to go home just to kind of get away from the pain that's in the world. If you're bullied at school, my guess is it's hard to get you to leave home. Because home's safe. That's where you feel loved and valued, and it's not safe out there. If you or I, if we get really good news or really terrible news, news that really affects us, most of the time the place we want to go process that is at home, where at least in theory it's safe enough to handle our emotions. I don't know if you remember where you were on 9/11. I was walking around college campus and I saw everybody sort of cramming into the student union. And so I went and crammed in as well, and we watched on the TV as the two towers fell. And I can remember, in light of that sort of devastating news, really just wanting to be home. I was 5 hours away from home. I just really wanted to be there to sort of process all of that. If there's relational tension, we often want to escape and go home. Even think about the pain of the weather. If the weather's really bad, where do you want to go? You just want to be home. If it's ice storming outside, everyone just holes up, wants to stay there. Now, I'm sure there's others that I could put up here, of times you just want to go home. Maybe I should have put, during the middle of a boring sermon, I just want to go home. But here's my question. All of us long for home at time to time. And again, you could add other things to this. We long for home, we want to rest, or we want to belong, or we want to get away from pain. But my question is, how is that working out for us? Does home really meet these needs? Well, think about rest. Okay, maybe in one sense, home is restful, but in lots of other senses, it's really not. I have just as big a to-do list at home as I do at work. And as soon as I get home, that list is sort of staring me in the face. If you've got kids, kiss, rest, goodbye, right? It's just not happening. Now you're the meal coordinator, the taxi driver, the hygiene enforcer, the attitude adjuster, and the laundry specialist. There's no rest there. But even if you don't have kids, or maybe your kids are grown and gone, things break and constantly need attention. The responsibilities of maintaining a home, they can be so exhausting, no matter what your home looks like. Home, it sort of holds out this promise of rest, but it doesn't deliver. At least not consistently, at least not to the depth at which we long for it to. Well, how about belonging? We might say, okay, home is supposed to be the one place where we are unconditionally loved, where we fully belong just as we are. But that's just not true. Some of the most intense wounds that you and I carry around came from home. Home, it's supposed to be this safe haven of belonging, but for lots of us, that has not been our experience. Maybe home for you was pretty performance-oriented. And so your parents seemed to only really notice you when you were performing, either at school or on the athletic field. That's what got their attention. Maybe there was a lot of manipulation in your home. And you learned from a very young age how to keep mom and dad happy. Maybe it was with your siblings. Rather than being these committed companions, they were competitors in your home. Then there's homes with physical or verbal abuse. There is absolutely no sense of belonging when there's that kind of abuse at home. Because home's not even safe anymore. Or maybe it wasn't abuse, but it was just negligence. Didn't feel like anyone saw you. Your needs weren't met, so certainly there's no belonging if you're not even seen. I'm convinced that for none of us, our homes really meet these deep, sort of innate longings that we have. Even pain. We try to run to our homes to escape the pain in the world, and yet, once we get home, we find there's pain there waiting for us. If you're married, you know marriage can be one of the best blessings, the best encouragements you've ever had, but you also know that no one can quite hurt you like your spouse can hurt you. Many parents have to live and watch their children make really bad choices. And as much as you try to influence, as much as you try to steer them in the right way, they make bad decisions, and it affects them, and it affects you, and it's painful. I mean, sometimes there's so much relational pain at home, you'd rather not go home. Be anywhere else. Most of our addictions are nursed at home. Maybe home is a place where you're alone. And you've longed for a companion, but you're just lonely. I was thinking about my wife's grandmother yesterday. She was married for 50 years. A couple years ago, my wife's grandfather passed away. So she's in the same home she's always been in for 50-some years, and yet now that home's completely different. It's a totally different home now. She's alone. There's a loneliness that she's never known. And I feel like this is where Christmas sort of intersects this story. Because Jesus left his home to sort of make his home here with us. To live in our tents, to become a wanderer with us. Jesus, he felt the sting of the dissatisfaction of home here. He really did. But he didn't tell us just to sort of stuff all these longings, all these desires that we have. No, what he did is he told us where we can direct those longings. Listen to what Jesus offers to us. He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." You see what he's saying? Jesus is inviting us to come to him, to make him our home. He's saying, I'm the only place where these deep longings that you have can really be met. If you're weary and burdened, the longing for rest is really good, but the only place to find it is in Christ. When we feel lonely and excluded and we have this deep need to belong, the only place that can happen is in Christ. Jesus is only the one who can help us escape the pain of this world, because he took it all on himself. He absorbed it, and he's the one who actually defeated it. And so he has this sort of open invitation to all of us. He says, "Come to me." Wherever the pain of this world sort of intersects our lives, pain and longing, they're very closely related. When those two things intersect, Jesus' invitation for us is to come to him. So where do you find yourself this morning? Are you exhausted? Come to me. Are you stressed? Come to me. Do you feel like you don't measure up? Jesus says, come to me. Are you lonely? Do you feel excluded? Jesus says, come to me. Are you beat up by addictions? Jesus says, come to me. Are you surrounded by conflicts? Come to me. Do your finances look bleak? Jesus says, come to me. He invites us to take the pain we feel that's connected to these deep longings that we have and to bring them to him, to make him our true home. You know, towards the end of Jesus' life, Jesus started telling his followers, I'm getting ready to leave. And this sort of rocked their world. These followers of Jesus, for the first time in their life, they have met someone who can handle their pain and their deep longings. Jesus was the world to them, and now Jesus is saying he's going to leave? Wait, what? And so Jesus tries to comfort them. And you'll be familiar with this passage, but listen to what he says. He talks about home. He says, do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I not have told you? Would I have told you I'm going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. So he compares heaven to a home. But do you notice the distinguishing feature about this home? He says it's going to be where I am. That's what makes it home. That's what makes heaven amazing, is that's where Jesus will be. This one who can handle all of our deep longings. You're probably familiar with this C.S. Lewis quote. He says, the fact that our heart yearns for something that earth can't supply is proof that heaven must be our home. Here's another one from Lewis that I wasn't as familiar with, but really addresses these longings. Listen to what he says. He says, apparently then, our lifelong nostalgia, our longing to be reunited with something in the universe from which we now feel cut off, to be on the inside of some door which we have always seen from the outside, is no mere neurotic fancy, but the truest index of our real situation. And to be at last summoned inside would be both glory and honor beyond all merits, and also the healing of that old ache. That's why we should long for heaven. Because that's the only place these deep, innate desires that we all have can truly be met, and will truly be met. All our longings find their home in Christ. So that then brings us to the second question. How do we increase our longings? And the more I thought about this, I don't think we can. I don't think you can muster up any sort of energy to say, you know what, I'm going to long more today than I did yesterday. You can't walk out the door and say, today is going to be a day of longing. I don't think you can do that. But what we can do is, I think what often happens is we do something else with these longings. When we feel pain, when we have these deep sort of yearnings for something more, I think we often do one of two things. I think we either medicate them or we distract ourselves from them. And when we do either of those things, that makes our longing sort of diminish. We medicate. We turn to some other substance that just helps us forget sort of the pain or the longing that we have. We could turn to drugs. We could turn to alcohol. We can even turn to shopping. I was thinking about that this time of year. It feels good to go buy something, doesn't it? So if there's some ache in your heart, well, let me just go buy something. Or maybe it's not medicate. Maybe we turn to distraction. And how many distractions are there? If something's painful, if something's hard, if it's stirring something inside of us, maybe I'll go watch Netflix. And how many seasons have been watched that way? Or just scroll Facebook. That's easier. And man, I am guilty of that all the time. I'm not sure we can increase our longings, but I think we can stop distracting ourselves from them. And just allow ourselves to sort of sit with the pain. To sort of sit with the deep longing we have for something more than we're currently experiencing, and then respond to Jesus' invitation to come to him. So I want us to end our service this morning this way. To just whatever you're experiencing in life right now, there's pain in all of our stories, to sort of focus in on that pain and say, well, what is it about this pain that's not being met here? And then just come to Jesus with that. Spend time talking to him about what you're feeling and saying, Jesus, I want you to be my home. We're going to pass the Lord's Supper. You know, when the Lord's Supper, we look backwards, but we also look forwards. When Jesus took it, he said, this is the covenant of the blood of my new covenant. And I'm not going to drink this again until I drink it with you in my Father's kingdom. So we hold it in our hands now, but while we hold it, we are longing for the day when we'll one day take it with him face to face. So it's going to be quiet. There's going to be some music in the background. Take some time to sit with your pain, sit with your longing, and come to Jesus with that. Then we'll take communion together. Oh, and I just wanted to mention, sort of a little awkward even to mention, we've moved to gluten-free bread. I only want to mention that because I know for some of you that's pretty significant. But it's just a random detail. So, but from going forward, that'll be the case. So let's just take these next few minutes. There'll be music playing, and then we're going to sing some songs about longing after we take communion. So let's pass the elements, please. God, it seems, especially at this time of year, that the pain is often right there. There's joy, but there's pain too. Maybe it's someone who's no longer in our lives. Maybe it's a strained relationship. Maybe it's loneliness, fear. We don't have to talk about pain for very long for all of us to feel it. And Lord, I know my own tendency to want to distract myself, sort of run away from it, medicate. But Lord, would we hear your invitation to us this morning? Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest. God, help us not to get settled. To know that our true home is coming. One day. One day. Lord, would we be a forward-looking people? Always hopeful. Knowing that you're going to right every wrong. You're going to dry every tear. You are going to bring justice and peace like we've longed for. And would we hang on? Would we hang on in hope that you are going to do it? And we take these elements as a sign of our faith that you're coming one day. And one day we're going to feast with you at your table. Amen. In our true home. Amen. Let's take and eat together. Why don't we stand? We're going to sing. A lot of our songs, you'll notice in worship, have a lot of longing in them, a lot of desire. So we're going to end with a couple songs that really express that.